let's crack on.
Let's crack
this
on.
Conversation.
Yeah. This is going to be so much fun. I'm really looking forward to this.
Yeah.
Well, so my first question really was kind of setting the tone here,
Yeah.
and talking about the positive, because that's where I come from always with this. You had said that there were a bunch of companies that were showing, some of the solutions to climate change. So can you talk a bit about who you saw that got you really excited?
Yeah. So I mean, it was this fascinating week in Houston. And it's an enormous energy conference. So I think there's something like 10,000 different attendees there. It comes from a history of being an oil and gas conference, and that's still very much in the DNA of the event. But alongside that has grown up this second half of it, which is companies who are genuinely, everyone's genuinely interested in transition. We wouldn't want to slight anyone, but who really, really want to be there to showcase what they're doing within the transition. And there were some leading speakers who spoke as well, who just, were so inspiring. The first one was the US Secretary of Energy, Jennifer M. Granholm. She spoke on the first day at lunchtime. And to be honest, it was a bit of a relief to hear her speak. So we turned up excited on the first day to be at this conference. The first three keynotes were from oil company CEOs. And the standout quote, which I've already shared on LinkedIn, was from the Saudi Aramco CEO. He said, the world needs to abandon the fantasy of transitioning away from oil and gas.
Funny that.
Yeah.
Totally an objective opinion, has nothing to do with how his company makes money.
And that view was repeated by others as well. And I think that a lot of that was because, other than just being a vested interest, it was about linear projections. It was about saying the world is this way at the moment, it's only incrementally going to change. What really inspired me was hearing these people who were seeing a different view of the future, where they see that we're on this cusp of exponential change. So Jennifer M. Granholm, she, and actually any other US politicians who spoke there, they speak like, motivational speakers, American politicians. So you can't help but get excited by it. But she was talking about the moves that they're taking right now to encourage this exponential change. The Inflation Reduction Act, all the money flowing out into the US economy to encourage the development of green products, the 7 different hydrogen hubs that they've selected. Just the numbers in the US are vast.
The interesting thing with the Inflation Reduction Act is the way it's been structured. So it's tax breaks. So for the amount of money that the government doesn't take in taxes, it's like 20 times more that's actually spent on these solutions. So at some point, I'd really like to talk about what that might look like here if we were to, steal the designers of the Inflation Reduction Act under their design and really make it happen here.
It's a timely point. Because you may have picked up that Anthony Albanese is making an announcement today about what the Australian response to the IRA is going to be, basically, which may be the rebranding of some other funds, but there might be some new innovation and novel ideas in there as well. I'm very much looking to hearing what comes out of that.
Yeah. So you heard it her first.
And on the ABC this morning.
They don't really count. This is where people get their news from.
So Jennifer M. Granholm really sort of lifted the mood again at lunchtime on the first day. And then there was a couple of other speakers who just left me very excited about where we're going and the fact that everyone on this call is involved in some way in the energy transition, and we're in the right place at the right time. Bill Gates was the headliner on Thursday. And most people probably know that Bill Gates, as well as doing lots of philanthropy around improving poverty and world health, is also deeply involved in climate. So the book that he wrote, How to Avoid a Climate Disaster, I think it's called, it's very good because it breaks down the challenge into different industries, talks about what the green premium, the amount of additional money that you need to pay to fly on a jet, which is zero emissions, versus emissions to create cement, steel, etc. From that basis of educating himself and everyone else around all this stuff, he's then gone and formed Breakthrough Energy, which is a significant investment fund backed by him, but with others in it as well, which goes out looking for the startups who can, if they're able to scale, have real impact, particularly on the hard to abate, the tough problems. And what I hadn't realized is that their criteria for investment is that, and I think I've got this right, that they have to be able, a startup has to show that if they are successful, their technology or whatever it is they're offering could reduce global greenhouse gas emissions by 0.5%. It was either 0.5% or 500 million tons a year, but it's an enormous number. And so they're really looking for the exciting technology of the future. And he highlighted a couple in particular, which he thought were making particularly strong progress, one in steel and one in cement. So the steel one was an electro-winning process for manufacturing iron, so creating iron sheets by using electrical current from ore, not just from not creating steel from scrap, but actually creating iron from ore. And I went to the presentation by these guys. They were confident that they could do this at scale without creating a green premium. Time will tell, but it was just that sense that there really are things happening here, and the conversation now is different to the conversation a year ago, which is different to the conversation like 3 years ago. And it makes me excited about what the conversation is going to be in 2030.
The PR agencies that are pushing there's nothing we can do, it's all too late message, that is becoming less and less relevant and less and less believable.
Yeah.
You mentioned some companies, so Electric was steel manufacturer. What are some of the other kind of companies, the startups that are happening?
Yeah. Well, I suppose I went there because I work on industrial decarbonisation in particular. It was the ones which were different to the everyday, which jumped out at me, or the ones which fulfilled a niche need, which I could understand. So, another company which wants to be a large-scale developer of wind farms is something the world needs, but not something which really grabbed my attention. There was some things which stood out. So, one, when you first leave the conference and you walk into the exhibition space, you walk past this sign, which maybe I'll show.
Please do. I think we need to see that sign. These are my people. We're sharing my cultural heritage with our audience, and I think that's really important.
All right. So hopefully everyone can see. That was Jennifer M. Granholm and Bill Gates. This was a sign, so hopefully everyone can see that. The funny thing about that sign was between the executive conference, which was the bit you pay lots of money for to go and hear people like Bill Gates speak, and you get given a nice lunch, and the exhibition hall, which is for everyone else. It's still quite an expensive ticket, but it's a lower cost ticket. So the executives are allowed guns, but in the exhibition hall, you have to put your gun away. But once you
that must have been difficult for you.
Right. This was actually the first thing that you saw once you walked into the exhibition hall, and it was eye-grabbing. So this concept of a heavy lift airplane to move enormous wind turbine blades to remote locations rather than trucking them in, which may or may not be a good idea, right? But it really emphasized that people are thinking about solutions here from every single angle.
And on a really large scale.
And on a really, really large scale, yeah. I mean, another one which is not so in your face exciting as this, but I actually thought was really interesting, was a company called Blaze Technologies, new startup spun out of a US university, can't quite remember which one, which was a, let's just call it a magic box for taking ammonia and then partially reforming some of that ammonia into hydrogen, but not all of it, so that about 35% would be turned into hydrogen and the rest would remain as ammonia, which, as it turns out, is exactly the kind of mix of fuel which will combust in the same way as methane. So the reason that that's exciting, if you're someone like me who thinks about energy systems all the time, is you do find when you look at energy systems that you need some form of power, some form of stored energy, which you can draw upon every now and then, even if you've got lots of wind turbines and so on. And thinking about how you store that for long-term use is a bit of a quandary, but ammonia is easier to store than hydrogen. So if there's a relatively simple way to use your existing gas turbines to combust the ammonia hydrogen mix, then that's an exciting piece of the puzzle. And there were hundreds of these things out there. I mean, the other thing to notice when you walked around and saw all these startups, two things you noticed. One is that, no offense to Americans, but
hang on a second. I'm allowed to make fun of my country. I don't think you are, okay. But I'll get a ruling from the UN and I'll get back to you.
So it was okay to stretch to the truth. I'll put it that way. Let's be nice about it. So there was one lecture theatre where there were startups presenting hour after hour, 5-minute pitches, and each one, it wasn't that they claimed that if everything went right, they would be able to solve all the world's problems and the energy transition. That they claim they already have, but actually they were just,
biding their time.
Yeah, exactly.
It's an American cultural tradition. There are the two world's largest truck stops within a mile of each other in Oklahoma, and nobody bats an eye at, hang on a second, they can't both be the world's largest, but there you go. So yes, we have solved everything.
Yeah. So that was interesting. And then the other thing hanging around that space a bit was, it was just really clear there were venture capitalists everywhere. So even these startups who had just started last week in their garage with some idea which may or may not work, there was always a VC with a card ready to walk up to them and say, let's have another conversation.
And that's really good, because it's, really not too long ago, and certainly still the case here in Australia. It's really hard to get money for these projects. So
yeah.
Yes, cool. A lot of exciting things here. Oh, let's circle back. I wanted to avoid this, but I think we have to address the elephant in the room, which is the oil and gas companies talking about their transition and how it really doesn't matter, and it's really okay for them to just keep doing what they're doing. Oh, sorry, am I being naughty again?
So I'll give you a take on that from the event. So I think we would have all picked up on the fact that the way in which some companies are talking about long-term supply of energy to the world probably has changed over the last couple of years. A couple of years ago, before the war in Ukraine and so on, it was very much the future is all about the transition. And most of the traditional energy companies, or energy companies who come from an oil and gas background, at the event were still talking about the need for investment in renewables and the importance of growing this new source of energy. But they were more robust in their defense of the existing energy sources and had perhaps a bit of a playbook around some things which have truth behind them, of course, like the importance of energy and lifting people out of energy poverty and so on. But the thing which was tended to be missing from their narratives was the timeline. We have to do something because of what's coming down the road in terms of the impact on the climate, and therefore we need to be pushing to achieve the transition as quickly as possible. So that was the thing that I felt was missing. I did get the chance to ask a few different people about whether or not that was impacting the new stuff happening. So if you've got these existing companies who are doing some investment in the new stuff, but they're still continuing to invest a lot of their money in the development of the conventionals, is that actually holding back the development of the renewable projects and so on the world really, really needs? And it was interesting talking to renewable project developers, for example, if they felt they weren't getting access to money because it was going somewhere else. The general sense from them was no, that they felt that they were getting the funding that they needed. It varied depending on who you spoke to. But I think if you're a director of a oil and gas company and you're doing your fiduciary responsibility for your shareholders, then you've got a very good way to make money there. And so it's not likely that you're going to wake up in the morning tomorrow and decide to transfer all of that into investment in the energy transition, or transfer it as quickly as possible. And neither could you if you changed your mind completely, because you'd probably be out of the job and someone else would come in.
I think that's a really valid point, and also something that you see in the way that they write and speak about this is, yeah, we have to keep doing this.
And like I think, let's not get too subjective on it, but in my opinion, of course, there is a requirement for continued use of fossil fuels as we transition away from them in the longer term. But that the focus needs to be on the transition, and you can't argue with the climate science.
Yeah, that's why I'm so obsessed with the phrase removing demand. So, these companies, the startups where there are all looking in some aspect of removing demand for fossil fuels. And yeah, that's not to get I think I'll get myself in trouble here again.
Well, one thing that actually we could move on to is to talk about how the conference, it had that executive conference component, which on the first couple of days, especially, very much the focus was on the traditional oil and gas companies. But there's such variety when you walked over the bridge and past the gun sign. And I'm just going to share something else now. Grab me, everyone, whilst I do this. Okay. So this was just an example of the broad range of things which was being discussed. I think this was in an area which was called the Climate Hub. And it was a panel discussion on how design can play a role in the energy transition, which actually wasn't really what I thought at all. I think probably as an engineer walking into that, I think about design and I think about pipes and pumps and things. But one example here was about this plaque which had been put on a rock next to what had formerly been an Icelandic glacier, and this quote about this glacier's gone, could be the first of many more. Only you will know if we sorted it out and actually stop this decline, which is in some ways a depressing message, but it really got me that people are thinking about this from, again, every angle. How do we communicate the challenges of the transition? How do we grip people with the reality that this is something which definitely needs to be tackled right now?
For me, the big thing is, how do we grip people with the upsides? I love Sol Griffith's line, which I will quote at the drop of a hat, even if I have to drop the hat myself, that the future we create when we do everything we need to do in order to solve climate change will be glorious. And, from a marketing perspective, I think that's the message that can't be repeated too many times.
No, that's right. And you could see that there were different levels of optimism and pessimism communicated in the conference. There was also a lot of, as well as the transition's really hard and it's going to cost us lots of money, there was also that underlying current of optimism as well, particularly from the renewable energy companies and the startups and so on. I think it's a balance, isn't it? Because if you go all the way over into the optimism and you tell everyone that energy is going to be clean and completely free, the transition has challenges to it. And when we hit those bumps and challenges, then it's going to make people, feel like they will have lost the trust in the first statement you made, because it's turned out to not be true. But on the other hand, I think it's important that we do focus on the upside of this, because people will work much more towards an upside.
Yeah. When you talk about that, I'm reminded of the promise of nuclear back in the 1950s, where, one of the great phrases was electricity will be too cheap to meter, that they would just have such an abundance of it that it would just be, use more, strike arcs between your friends, whatever, because there's so much of it around. And then we found that had a few bumps in the road.
Bumps along the road, right?
And we never got our atomic cars.
No, how disappointing.
Yeah, atomic flying cars was I was promised atomic flying cars. You mentioned in your notes about methane fugitive emissions, and that's a big issue in America. There's 1 million wells that are said to be leaking.
Yeah, I didn't get too many talks on that. I went to one, and again, a startup, but a more mature startup offering a technology solution in that space. There was certainly quite a lot on the program on it, which I thought was interesting. The startup which I saw had I don't know exactly how you describe it, but like a bio version of concrete. So you put these microbes in water and you put them around the well which is leaking. So if the concrete case is leaking, and then over time, these microbes leach something out like limestone, which eventually sort of fills all the gaps.
Oh, right.
And the advantage over trying to plug that with normal concrete is very viscous, so it can't get into all these little cracks, whereas this solution can. So again, it was just another area where people recognize that there's a problem and they're going at it with new ideas and innovations. It's a cliche, isn't it? The US is, home to the entrepreneur and is an enormous hotbed of innovation. But you actually did get that. A few there. But if there was a buck to be made, people were finding a way to make it.
Yeah, I guess the question with that will be, who'll pay for it, because the oil and gas industry in America has largely just shoved that one aside. So.
Well, and the speaker, you reminded me now that what the speaker said there. He did talk about that, and about the fact that because a lot of these issues are with wells which are sort of end of life, so it was never costed in that they would need this kind of remediation work done to them, and so there's a need to recognize, in the same way that mine sites have to recognize that there are end of life costs, to make sure that those sort of through life and then end of life costs to cover methane emissions are included in the original economics of the projects. And of course, the other thing, which there were talks on, but I didn't get to, is more advanced forms of methane emission monitoring, so fugitive emission monitoring, satellite monitoring of emissions, even using AI tools, which is becoming a thing now, because that then gives you data, which means that you can actually put an economic cost on additional emissions.
Yeah, I've seen people doing satellite monitoring on, I think, kind of a small scale, but nobody's doing a whole of country kind of thing. And, my understanding is often the companies that own the wells no longer exist. They do the dodgy builders method of the Phoenix companies.
Yeah.
So, I had a conversation with someone who's basically, well, who's going to pay for that? Because that company no longer exists. And it's just a mix and match of owners and things once they move off of that property.
Yeah.
Do you want to just take a moment and check and see if we have any questions from our audience? Do we have anything in the chatty?
That's true. That's a good one. Oh, look, there is some. We should have been paying more attention to this.
Yes. What it really is our audio technician should have been paying more attention to that, and I will be firing them.
So I'll just answer a couple of them in order. Larissa asked about green fertilizer. I'm sure there was, but I didn't go to it. But I would have done if I'd seen it. I mean, part of the problem was that there's just so much going on. There were these two massive books, as also thrown out, where you could pick one of 10 tracks. And I definitely couldn't go to everything.
So like a music festival where your two favorite bands are on different stages on opposite ends of the venue at the same time.
Doug, nuclear. How was nuclear portrayed? We were in the US, so of course there was more acceptance of nuclear because it's already part of the energy system than there is here. There were sessions, quite a lot of sessions actually on nuclear. So it was just seen as part of the solution. I think for some who were more wedded to the continuation of the traditional energy system, let's put it that way, they sort of played up nuclear more because it's a low emission part of the current solution. But there's an existing industry, so why wouldn't you take advantage of nuclear where you can in somewhere like the US? Thanks, Doug, for the post. Working on the hoverboard. Any insights or discussions from Adrian on the ability to achieve a business case without a material carbon tax, ideally global? So that got to the heart of the question I wanted answered about why, if you're an investor, would you invest in a new energy project now compared to a conventional energy project? What I would say is I think most people understood the problem. I don't think that there was any one solution. There's obviously the patchwork of subsidies and so on, and the IRA, which is helping the US get projects off the ground. Adrian, there's a really good podcast which I listened to just a couple of days ago, which is like an hour on this exact subject and why the economics of renewable energy projects don't tend to be as good as the economics of a conventional energy project or other potential investments, and therefore what it is that we need to change what we need to change systematically in order for those projects to get off the ground.
Hopefully you'll be able to bung that up on the Net Zero Network LinkedIn page.
Yes.
Later on.
Let me make a note of that and I will post it. Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. Joe, why does City of Perth attend? It's like you have set me up perfectly for the next slide that I want to share. So I'm going to put that up now.
Yes, thank you, Joe, for that. That was going to be that was supposed to be my first question, was why were you there? But I just skipped straight through to the exciting part.
So why I was there personally actually is a story which goes back to participating in the World Energy Cities Partnership event, which was hosted in Perth in November last year. There are a number of cities, I can't remember exactly how many, let's say about 15 cities around the world, which are cities where energy is a significant component of their economy. And in most cases, it's places like Aberdeen and Houston and so on, where the oil and gas industry plays an important role. So these cities get together to share ideas. The mayors from these cities get together to share ideas. And that AGM was held in Perth in November last year. And I spoke at the time about what work that we're doing around generating renewable energy industrial precincts within Western Australia, which is a whole other subject maybe we'll get into. Because basically it was viewed as a success, this conference in Perth, and that there was lots of good relationships which were established, which could lead in future to investment coming back into Western Australia. So it made sense to then leave Perth, go out into the wider world and see if we could build connections between industry here in Perth and government with others from other locations. So I think that was how City of Perth got the business case up for this. I was part of a delegation which included people like Glenn Corrie, who's the CEO of Hazer.
And what is Hazer?
So Hazer is a Perth-based startup which does hydrogen pyrolysis. So they use natural gas, lots of heat plus natural gas without oxygen to create hydrogen and to create graphite as a byproduct. So that's where the carbon from the natural gas goes. So you capture the carbon into the graphite. The graphite is then a material which can be used for all sorts of things, including battery anodes and so on. And then you've got the hydrogen, which you can use at according to Glenn, a very competitive price. So they were there to actually build connections with customers and investors in the US. Infinite Green Energy was represented as well. There was a few others, and I just thought it'd be really interesting to go along with basically and spend time with all of these people. But the slide I show here shows a couple of different things which happened in the margins of the conference. So one was a meeting between the mayors of these various different energy cities, and you can see Basil up on the screen. So whatever you think of Basil's politics, he's definitely someone with energy and enthusiasm to promote the interests of the City of Perth, and I think he did a pretty good job of that over the week. And then we also attended a Austrade event as well, which is the one on the right, which was reaching out to local businesses in Houston to build connections and see if there were partnerships which could be formed with businesses in Australia. And there was a couple of other things as well. So it was a pretty busy week of trying to build those connections. Also, little known fact that Houston is a sister city of the city of Perth, and it was the 40th anniversary of that sister city relationship, which, if nothing else, was a good excuse for a Aussie beer and a meat pie. Anyway,
Excellent. Hopefully a well-made meat pie.
it had travelled well.
Yes.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Yeah.
I think we're getting near the end of our time here. I just want to make sure that you tell the rocket story before you before we run out of time, and then we can dip back to see if there's any more questions.
Okay. Well, I mean, that actually aligns really well with Alan's question about sustainable aviation fuel. So I'll answer that first, then I'll get onto the rockets. So Alan asks, anything on SAF or globally coordinated efforts to address aviation emissions? Nothing that I saw there, actually. Like SAF was mentioned, but and you're absolutely right that there needs to be global coordination for international aviation to be able to afford a significant amount of sustainable aviation fuel. I wish I had a better answer for you, Alan, but I didn't see anything when I was there. But I did see some rockets.
Got to have the rocket story.
Yeah. So
and we got to have the rocket picture.
Oh, I got to have the rocket picture. Okay. All right. Here we go. Do this. Okay. So hopefully you can see the rockets, and this is something which I already posted on LinkedIn, so a few people have probably seen it already. On the Sunday before the conference, I arrived on the Saturday night. Conference started on the Monday. Bleary-eyed and incredibly jet-lagged, but I'd already booked tickets to go to the Houston Space Center, Johnson Space Center, and it's an awesome museum with space capsules from the whole of the space age, and lots of other things as well. But what really struck me was the difference between these two rockets. So the rocket on the left is it's a Redstone rocket, which launched the first US astronaut, I think it was Alan Shepard, who went into space. And when you go to what's called Rocket Park, these rockets are sitting outside the museum. You walk up to that, and like I thought it was a model. I thought it was a toy.
Yep.
It's absolutely tiny. You can just about see the people at the bottom of it. You can, pretty much put your arms around the thing. And it was either Alan Shepard or Jess Grissom. They said you don't climb into this space vehicle. You put it on. It's like a piece of clothing. It's so small. They sit in that tiny capsule at the top. That was in 1961 that was launched. 1969 was, of course, the year of the moon landing. And on the right is a Saturn V rocket, and that was incredible to stand beside. Just the scale of it, and you can see the people in the diagram there. You've got these tiny people compared to this enormous rocket which took people all the way to the moon. So the thing on the left, and by the way, the engine on next to the Redstone rocket on the left is actually a Saturn V engine.
And they had
many. I can't remember how many.
5.
Yeah,
they had lots.
They had lots of. So there's this incredible technology transformation which happened over that 8-year period. And the moonshot is a cliche, of course, but to actually see the difference between these things and how they've gone from something which almost looks like a hobby to full-scale industrial effort to achieve something truly substantial was just an amazing parallel to what we need to do in the energy transition. So yeah, I couldn't resist sharing the
Yeah, no, it's a beautiful story, and of course, starting with that great speech, we choose to go to the moon, not because it's easy, but because it's hard. And I really feel we need to focus on that. Yes, this energy transition is hard, but we have the people, we have the ability. Let's just bloody well get it done.
Well, talking of politicians who say inspiring things, the other politician that I saw speak was John Kerry, who's the retiring US presidential special envoy for climate. So he's been flying all around the world, maybe using sustainable aviation fuel, maybe not, to try and stitch together climate deals and push forward what happens at COP and so on. And he was, again, a fantastic communicator. But he cut right across this whole idea that the energy transition is too hard, too complicated, and we can't do it. So it's very, very simple. We collectively are choosing to continue to pollute the atmosphere, and we need to just now invest in the solutions which take us to doing things in a different way. And that was essentially the essence of what he pointed out over 45 minutes. He was very bullish about it and very unguarded in his comments, because he's retiring and I don't think he really cares what he says anymore. And he's probably had a exciting and frustrating couple of years in equal measure in that role. And then the very last person who I mentioned, who I saw talk, who was interesting, was Walter Isaacson, who is the biographer of Steve Jobs, Einstein, and he's just finished 2 years working directly with Elon Musk on a biography of Elon Musk. So there's lots of discussion about whether or not someone like Musk is necessary to create this kind of fundamental system change, someone who's difficult to work with and so on. But my favorite quote from that discussion was someone said to him, I think the question was, why did Elon Musk buy Twitter? And his answer straight away was because he's nuts. Having spent 2 years with him, that's his main conclusion. He's an incredible genius, but he's not.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We need less Elon Musks and more Maxes in this.
Or the right amount of Elon Musk, maybe. And, maybe they can be nicer, which was part of his point, was he wasn't really sure that they could be nice, unfortunately.
I don't know that he does nice. Have we got any questions left? What time are we going to finish here?
We're into wrapping up.
Okay. So this is the chance. If you've got a question, you're going to need to post it really fast, or risk crying yourself to sleep tonight. So.
Larissa, I think, just to answer, Larissa asked a question around the World Energy Cities as being a good way to connect, but they didn't focus enough on the climate science. I think that's probably a fair observation. I think that it's a forum which obviously comes from a certain place and has lots of those people who come from a traditional energy background in it, and it won't. It's like many forums, it won't. Just like CERAWeek, it won't change overnight. But if we can have these conversations where we're emphasizing the positive and each leaning in and trying to have our impact, then I think that's the way that you can move, the whole population forwards, not just some of us out on a limb.
And I feel like the movement is really driven right now by the energy transition movement, is driven by personal connections almost more than these, people giving keynote speeches. Is there anyone that you kind of connected with while you were over there on a more personal level that, got you excited?
Yeah. Who was I sort of bowled over with, who I spoke directly with? That's a good question. It doesn't directly answer that, but I spent some time with. Actually, he asked him not to be named, but it was someone from a battery. He's like a company which installs industrial batteries, and he also has done lots of work in data centers in the past. And he was completely passionate about batteries and completely passionate about data centers. The amazing thing is that his like twin passions there are really coming to the fore now. There's suddenly a lot of talk about data centers. There's a lot of talk about AI and solving problems. There's also a lot of talk about AI just in terms of the amount of energy that it's going to use and how it can fit into the energy system. So what I liked about that was he was someone who already had passion for these things, who just then kind of happened to be right place, right time to bring these things together.
Well, I saw something recently that data centers are something like 4% of U.S. energy, or maybe even world energy.
Yeah, 4% of US at the moment, and could potentially double by 2030.
Yeah.
What Bill Gates said on that was that it could go, yes, there's definitely going to be a much higher demand. There may be innovations which actually reduce processing times in AI by 10%. 10 times, and so it's not quite the enormous wave of additional power demand that we're expecting at the moment, but equally it could go that way. So that was actually a really strong theme across the conference, and I think offers opportunity as well for somewhere like Western Australia, where we've got so much renewable energy. We're close to Asia. Are there things that we can be doing more with data centers, for example, which would serve our regional neighbours?
Yeah, data centers powered by wind farms is a really good answer.
Mm.
I'm always tempted with these things. I'm reminded of an article from the New York Times in the 1920s
Mm.
that showed, maybe it was the 1910s, that showed if horse and carriage uptake continued at the current rate, that all the streets in the city would be buried under 4 meters of horse poop because of the incredible volume. And then, of course, a few years later, the horseless carriage came in, and all the waste was up in the air.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah.
We got a last question.
Yeah. So I think there's one more query from Alex, and I'll answer that in a sec. But totally agree with you. I think we should be focusing on the opportunities for that exponential change, not an extrapolation of what has gone before, because that's what's going to get us to where we need to get to. Alex, what are the implications of Houston being a sister city of Perth? I'm not really sure, apart from maybe there's more opportunities for people who are interested to go back to Houston and go to the next CERAWeek.
And if you're in the meat pie business, there is definitely a growth opportunity there.
Actually, I will add to that with a slightly more serious answer, which is Houston is probably going to be the premier industrial, certainly hydrogen hub in the US, just because they have so much existing infrastructure there already. So the fact that we have this existing relationship with them enables us to learn a lot from that experience. I've connected with some people from the Houston Energy Transition Initiative who have been at the heart of that push to establish Houston as a hydrogen hub. There's lots of good renewable energy resources in Texas which can feed into it. So I think that it gives us the opportunity to learn an awful lot from somewhere which is doing some really cool stuff.
Cool.
I think we're at time, Keith.
We're at time. We've had a ton of fun. Well, thank you, Max, for going through the terrible jet lag so we didn't have to.
Good fun.
Thank you for not getting shot. And this has been a really interesting conversation. So, I don't know how our audience feels, but I've really enjoyed this. And thank you to Curtin University, who all unknowingly has let us use this classroom.
Yes.
So
thanks for that.
it's been a great space, which is not too echoey.
Okay, thanks everyone. See you all soon. Bye.